Hey everyone, higher running coach and Hoka athlete Sage Canaday here, the Training Talk Tuesday. Today we're going to talk about heart rate training, common mistakes and misconceptions runners make. I've done a lot of talks on this over the years. I'll link to one in the description below as well as at the end of this video, but I thought it needed to be updated based on some new technologies, things I've seen online, people asking a lot of questions about heart rate based training. And yeah, let's dive right in. Thanks so much for tuning in. So the first thing we see, the first mistake, is the idea that your numbers are relative. It's very genetic based with your heart rate. That comes with your maximum heart rate. That comes how your heart rate may change over time as you get older. It doesn't necessarily drop 1 beat per year of life. It's not 220 minus your age usually. Your heart rate changes as your fitness improves, especially your resting heart rate, but your whole zones could shift also over time. So, me running at 7-minute mile pace or 4 minutes per kilometer pace at 150 beats per minute, just because you're running at that pace at 180 beats per minute doesn't necessarily mean you're working harder or are closer to your threshold. It may be the same sort of effort for you, even though your heart rate value is totally different. Likewise, someone may also be at 120 beats per minute and be breathing very hard and working very hard. It sounds like a low number though to a lot of people. So, genetics, it's a moving target is what I'm saying. It changes as you get older, it changes with your fitness, but there's also just some genetic variation in heart rate ranges between your max and your minimum heart rate, but also, what range might be your lactate threshold or VO2 max. It's not an easy thing to compare the numbers, so don't get caught up in the numbers. The second point I want to make is don't be a slave to your sensor. There's a lot of sensor error. Even if you have something like a chest strap, it could trip errors. It might tune into your cadence or how many steps you're taking in a minute. If you have some chest hair like me, even with a chest strap, it may read inaccurately if the strap's too loose or too tight, or it's not getting a good connection with the electrical signals of your heart, right? It could be dry outside, there could be a dry wind, static electricity interference. It doesn't always read accurately. So people say, oh, my heart rate was 230, I must be overtrained. Well, it could be an error in your heart rate monitor if your heart rate's usually 160, right? That's a pretty extreme change, not necessarily due to stress and not sleeping enough or running at a high intensity. You didn't achieve a new max by 40 beats per minute is what I'm saying. Likewise, same thing with optical straps, even less accurate generally. The wrist strap, it needs to be very sensitive to surges of blood in your veins using an infrared sensor usually, and that doesn't always work. That actually doesn't work a lot of times for a lot of people, especially if it's cold outside, you have cold hands, circulation differs between people, again with the genetic variations. It's hard to get an accurate reading sometimes, especially when you're running or you're exercising. So realize that your threshold zones don't magically change by a huge amount usually overnight. You don't reach a new max without knowing it. Usually it could be a sensor error. Now things do get more accurate and I think have the most value probably with your resting heart rate. You could use a sensor like a pulse oximeter, I don't know, it does oxygen saturation as well, at resting levels. When you wake up in the morning, hopefully you didn't have any nightmares, but if you wake up in the morning and you're calm and relaxed before you've had any coffee or other stimulants, and stay relaxed, low blood pressure, you could try to get a resting pulse, resting heart rate reading, and of course you could do that manually very accurately, especially over a span of 60 seconds, right? Count how many beats you feel on this place on your throat. You could get a good pulse reading there, also on the wrist or just over the heart as well. Get a pulse reading over 60 seconds. It's more accurate than if you're doing 30 seconds or 10 seconds. At resting heart rate, it should be very slow, and that is an accurate, valid thing to measure because you might know your relative resting pulse over time, and it may change over time very well as your fitness improves. It's a good indicator your aerobic fitness is improving if your resting pulse is coming down. Likewise, it's also a very good indicator if you had a stressful event or stressful thing going on, right? Maybe you had a nightmare or a bad night of sleep. Maybe you drank too many beers the night before. Maybe you're overtraining a little bit. You have an elevated resting pulse in the morning. that's actually a sign of overtraining and other health stresses that could be fluctuating over time. Not a bad idea to track that one, and it's going to be more accurate even with the sensors at the lower resting pulse rate. Of course, you could do it manually though. When you're running and exercising, it's another thing. The third mistake people make is, of course, you have to go by, if you're doing zone training, zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, looking at threshold lactate curves, what percent effort you're going to go between aerobic to anaerobic, higher intensity training, is they use these arbitrary formulas like 220 minus your age to find your 100% max heart rate, or 180 minus your age to find your easy aerobic range. Like I said, the numbers don't always work. There's a lot of genetic variation, and your heart rate ranges and values are a moving target. A lot of people will not know their 100% max heart rate. I've said this in a lot of talks, and it's hard to get. It's hard to get. It's a moving target, but it's also something that you have to have a very progressive VO2 max test in a lab usually to pull yourself up to 100% max heart rate. There are some workouts and tests you could do, a well-paced 3K race or 2-mile race, for example, or some really high intensity 3 to 5 minute hill reps with a short rest, progressively loading and building to that 100%. But it's very painful. It's very hard to pull out a 100% max heart rate value. And again, with the straps, you can't be having any error with them either. It's got to be a real reading. So, that's what we call VO2 max aerobic capacity. The test is usually very progressive in a controlled lab. I've only had one done once, and it gave me a max heart rate reading that I couldn't pull out in workouts. But I know now, this is 6 years later, it's probably changed. And did it drop 6 beats over 6 years? I don't know. It's probably not linear. So if you don't know your 100% max, it's very hard to assign a number or zone. What is 75% of your max? What is, lactate threshold? Is it 85% of your max? What number is that? It's kind of a moving target. It's kind of a crapshoot, and that's why I wouldn't be a total slave to the numbers and the sensors without knowing, getting some VO2 max testing. It's pretty expensive. But the thing you can do, and this is the main takeaway of the talk, the thing you can do is go by perception. Go by your breathing rate, and know that if you want to build aerobic base, and most of my miles are low intensity aerobic base building miles as a distance runner, you generally want that for about 80% of your training most times of the year, if not more, then you could be able to talk when you go out and run, especially if you're out on a trail run where you throw pace out the window. If you've run some marathons or 10Ks or half marathons or 5Ks, you kind of might know what your pace range is at an easy pace on flat ground in good weather conditions, and what heart rate values might be around there if your heart rate monitor is reading accurately. But you say, okay, I'm a minute or 2 minutes per mile, a minute per kilometer slower than my marathon pace. I'm pretty relaxed. And at that pace, because you could carry on a conversation with a running partner. You might be laughing at jokes, having an in-depth, long conversation. You're not breathing so hard that you can't string together a bunch of sentences and paragraphs if you have to. And you're talking on the run and not being in pain and not having to worry about pushing the pace, so to speak. That's how you know you're in an easy aerobic zone. It's the easiest thing. Just listen to your breathing, your ability to talk. You get into 85% max heart rate, might start getting harder to talk, right? You might be spitting out maybe one sentence at a time. Well, you're getting closer to the thresholds, aerobic threshold, lactate threshold. Congratulations. You get up to VO2 max training, you can only spit out a couple words at a time, maybe expletives, because you're in pain and it's hard and it hurts and you have lactate surging in your veins, or blood. That's the general thing. The talk test, so to speak, easy aerobic conversational base miles is the way to go. You could carry on a conversation. It's very subjective, but you could learn to read your own body's cues. And if you're tired some days, that pace range might slow down quite a bit because you don't want to overtrain or get injured. It's better to be consistent and to have that aerobic base miles. It's the easiest way to read it. Don't always be a slave to the numbers or heart rate. That's my spiel. Thanks so much for tuning in on this training talk. Again, thank you to the Patreon supporters for really making this channel possible. Again, Coach Sandy and I sell training plans at higherrunning.com for any service, any distance. We also have premium member perks on there. You can check it out on the website, link below. Subscribe to Sandy's channel as well, Running Wild. Thank you to title sponsor Hoka for keeping the dream alive. More race updates and vlogs coming your way. Hope you're doing well, and stay tuned for more VO2 Max Productions.